Hey, good morning, people. It's been a couple of days since I've been done a screencast, so I thought I would reconnect with you all this morning. We're going to be leaving the fencing unit and moving into metal classifications. So I thought this would be a good day for me to walk through some notes and give you all some information on metals, and then we're going to circle back to welding with the MIG welder and torch use and talking about those pieces of equipment. So, um, flashback will be posted on the Google site and a worksheet that goes along with this material. You'll just go ahead and answer those questions and share them with me. This weekend, I'm going to try my best to get everything caught up on Infinite Campus as far as grades. Some of the stuff is kind of trickling in. So I appreciate those of you who are on it, getting me this work every single day. It makes my job a lot easier when I have to backtrack 4 and 5 days and try and fill in my grade sheet. It just gets complicated on my end. So thank you for those of you that are on top of it. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me via email. All right, so today, metal classification. When we go to the shop, when we are working on a project, there's lots of different options of metal that we can use. And people that do metal work, especially farmers, were notorious for keeping scraps of metal and different things in the event that we might need them. When we need to make a repair, we might just have to use what we've got on hand just to get the job done. So we need to kind of know what we're talking about. Knowing the difference in terminology, there's lots of reasons why that is important. One, if that we are looking at a plan, it's going to help us better understand that plan and visualize that plan. If that we know what this metal is called, most of the time a plan or a blueprint is going to give us a materials list. It might actually even be a separate page on that blueprint or plan. And if there are 6 or 7 different types of metal being used, then that interpretation, we will know on the plan how to interpret that. It's also going to help us if that we are in a fabrication shop, if we're ever making a repair for someone, better communicate with the customer. And if we go to buy something, we can better communicate with a sales rep. So as I go through this, I'll talk about some of my interactions with people and some confusion because they didn't know the different types of metals. So the first thing we need to talk about is what is hot rolled metal versus cold rolled metal. When you go to a metal sales vendor, he's going to have both types. And hot rolled and cold rolled are typically reserved when we are talking about steels. The classification terms that we use are going to vary or are going to be the same for aluminum or stainless steel, which is steel that has treatment on it, so it's not going to rust or galvanize. And we'll get into those things as we go through this unit. Hot rolled steel is hot when it is milled. It is the cheaper form of making steel. They take molten metal and they just pour it into a die, and then they form it the size that they need to. Because it's hot, it moves very easily, so it's easy to shape, and it cuts very easily. The thing about it, though, is when it's hot, it is going to be one size. All of those molecules are expanded. When it cools off, it's going to shrink a little bit. So it's not going to be as exact. And for a lot of projects, especially on the farm, doesn't matter. When we practice welding on plates that are going to wind up going in the scrap bin, doesn't matter. But when we go to actually making tooling, like if that we want to thread a piece of rod to make our own bolt, or if we were going to make something that needed to be precise, we'd want to go with our second option, which is cold rolled steel. Cold rolled steel is steel that is actually molded at room temperature. So they run this steel through a die, and they manipulate those molecules with high, extreme amounts of pressure. When it comes out, though, it's going to be the size that it was when it went through that die or when it was cut. So that process is a little more involved. I'll show you hot rolled here. Let's see how this works.
Steel is highly resistant to shaping when it's cold, and for that reason it is generally rolled whilst it's hot.
So rolling is
To
just
make sure
forming.
the
That's
steel
just
is
the
at the
term.
correct temperature for rolling, it is fed into a furnace. Here it travels through several temperature control zones until it's at the correct temperature and ready for rolling. Whatever the product, the principles of hot rolling are the same. Steel is squeezed between rolls until the final thickness and shape are achieved. To do this, the rolls must exert forces of tens of millions of newtons.
So you can see it's just
equivalent
molten
to a weight
metal.
of thousands of tons. The rolls, therefore, run in massive bearings, mounted in housings of enormous strength and driven by powerful electric motors. These are known as mill stands. The layout of a rolling mill can vary from a simple single-stand mill to several stands positioned either side by side or in a line. The mill rolls themselves can either be plain for flat products such as strip, used for products such as cladding, or profiled for sections, beams and columns for use in construction. Mill stands have various roll arrangements depending on the product being rolled.
So you get the idea. Molten metal. It is hot because then the dies can easily manipulate it into whatever dimension, size, and shape that we want. Cold milling, I could not find a good video. They talk mostly about little plate stuff that doesn't really apply, but it's similar, except there's just extreme pressure because the steel is like 68, 70 degrees Fahrenheit. One thing that we talk about metals, I was always taught that if it's red, it's hot because that's the color, and if it's green, it's cold. And I tried to find some truth to that this morning, and I could not. In fact, it's actually just a coating. So this color code chart that comes from a steel mill, they've got red here, and they give it a code finish, and that's a cold rolled product. And we've got green here. But then when you come down here to hot, we've got red again. When we talk about aluminum, we've got green, we've got blues, we've got blues for hot, and we've got blues for cold. So I don't know how to advise you there. I do know at Sandusky, the reds and the yellows are typically going to be the hot, and the greens are going to be cold. Sandusky, if you're not familiar, that's a big metal warehouse vendor in Columbia, Kentucky. They buy steel by the semi-load, and they allow the public to come in and shop. If you're ever doing a big repair project or a big construction project where you need lots of steel, that is going to be the place to get it. Just FYI, Sandusky in Columbia. So that's where I get all the steel for class. Okay, so when we talk about classifications, we've got the first thing, and the most common, is going to be what we call flat stock. And flat stock be referred to as a strip or a bar. Let me get that out of the way. So a strip is just a long piece of metal that's cut into a strip, and it's less than a quarter of an inch. The bar is going to be greater than a quarter of an inch, and it can be rectangular or it can be square. So bar, rectangular, square, greater than a quarter of an inch. Strip is less than a quarter of an inch. And one note, the strip is what we use to practice welding on. It's 3/16. Plate. Plate is metal that is wider than 8 inches. So this is a 8 by 12 foot sheet of steel. It's huge. It's heavy. All of the steel that you see in this picture would be referred to as plate. It is utilized for structural, like building water towers. It can be used as a lining for trough or livestock, or building a tank of some sort. Extremely heavy, hard to handle plate. And plate is actually what's used as the base for our welding booth tables. Angle iron, a very common structural steel that we will use a lot when we are manufacturing things or fabricating things. We call it angle iron because the two angles of the plates are formed together to make a 90-degree angle. Angle iron can have different size, what we call legs. So you can have 4x4 angle, you can have 3x3, you can have 1.5 by 1.5 inches. And then it's also sized based on the thickness of the steel. So you could have 3/16, quarter inch, 3/8, 1/8, and then we can even get into thin angle that's sized by gauge, 16 gauge, 20 gauge, 10 gauge, so on. Tubing. Tubing refers to a hollow angular tube that can be either square or rectangular. And as you can see in these pictures, again, the wall thickness of that steel or that tube can vary. So here in the middle we have quarter inch, then we've got real thin 1/8 stuff over here, and then we've got 3/16 over here. We can also have rectangular tubing, and again, any of these metals can come in the hot or the cold process. Round tubing or pipe. This is just a hollow tubing. Again, the wall thickness or the thickness of that metal that makes up the pipe can vary. So this is probably 3/8, but it can be a quarter, it can be 1/8, it can be 16. I called over to Sandusky and I was asking them some prices on stuff. And I said, "What's your price on round tubing?" I wanted to sound really smart. And he says, "Oh, you mean pipe?" Yeah, pipe. So, it really just depends who you're talking to. A lot of fabricators, they like to say round tubing, it's pipe. Okay. So, it really doesn't matter. People will know what you're talking about. Gate manufacturers, they call it all pipe gates, pipe welding. When you're talking about transferring liquid petroleum, compressed natural gas, they're all pipeline welders, pipe fitters. But some fabricators like to call it round tubing. It's whatever. Rod is just solid round metal. That's what we've got. There is no orifice in the middle. It is solid. So we might use something like this for hay spear. We might use something like this for a support. If that we're building a creep feeder, we could use pipe. We could use square tubing. We could use solid round. The solid round is going to be a lot stronger. You've got a lot more molecules there. C-channel. As you can see in this yellow painted piece of steel, it gets its name because of its C shape. We typically it can really be used in any orientation, and it comes in so many different sizes and gauges. So we've got a really small piece of C-channel here in the middle. Then we've got a thin wall. This is actually a bent piece of metal. They use this tool called a brake to bend that metal with those edges there. So it was a flat piece of plate, and then they just curve it up. And then we get out here and you can see that there's different thicknesses and different heights. So C-channel. Rebar. Let me move this. I don't know if that shows up on the video or not, but rebar is essentially a solid rod that we actually roll texturing into. And the reason that we roll texturing into this solid rod is to have more surface area. And that is because rebar is primarily used to reinforce concrete. So I talked about the ability to understand and communicate with people. When I was working college at the shop, we had a guy come in and he said he needed a piece of steel and he needed it to be this diameter, like rebar, but without all the notches on the outside. Rod. So again, that communication and knowing this stuff really helps to be able to understand what a customer wants or convey to a customer what you're doing. Interesting thing about rebar, we see it here. This is a cutaway from a bridge that's being built. But when you drive across a bridge, we like to think, if that concrete's solid, we're going to be good. The concrete doesn't matter at all. It's all about rebar. And there is so much steel in that bridge that, people get freaked out when they see chipping away of concrete. Really doesn't matter. What matters is that rebar work and that structural steel work below. Guys, that's it. I've got a series of questions that are posted in the doc. Just go ahead and answer those for me, and we will continue on with metal types on Monday. Have a great weekend. Get some rest, and if you haven't yet, get caught up on my schoolwork, and do so for all your classes. Be good to your teachers. Tough time for us too. Miss you all, and we'll see you again very soon.